The New Mexico Territory, 1875. Dust motes danced in the slanting afternoon light, catching fire like tiny embers as they floated through the golden beams pouring through the auction house windows. Maria Consuelo Vasquez kept her eyes fixed on those motes, refusing to meet the stares of the men who studied her as one might appraise livestock. Her hands, though unbound, felt heavy as iron at her sides. The thin cotton dress they'd given her faded blue, threadbare at the elbows, hung loosely from shoulders that had once carried water jugs across miles of desert with her family's small caravan. That was before the raid, before the fever took her parents, before her brother's desperate deal with a territorial officer had gone sour. Next up, the auctioneer drawled, his voice like boot leather dragged through sand. Mexican girl, 19, maybe 20, can cook, clean, tend animals, speaks English good enough. He nudged her forward with a short walking stick. Bidding starts at $10. The silence that followed pressed against her ears like river water. Maria lifted her chin slightly, a small defiance that cost nothing but might preserve something inside her that felt dangerously close to breaking. $8, came a voice from the back. 5, countered another. The auctioneer's face pinched with disappointment. Gentlemen, she ain't damaged goods. Strung back all her teeth. $3, called a voice Maria hadn't heard before. A ripple of laughter washed through the crowd. $3 wouldn't buy a decent pair of boots, let alone a human being meant to work from sunrise to sunset. $3. The auctioneer's voice pitched higher with indignation. Hell, boy, you trying to insult me? Maria finally allowed herself to look toward the voice. Near the back wall stood a man unlike the others, tall and lean, with eyes the pale blue of winter sky. His clothes weren't fine, but they were cleaned-in pants, faded red shirt beneath a leather vest worn soft at the edges. A wide-brimmed hat cast shadows across a face weathered by sun and wind, but younger than she'd expected. 30, perhaps. His beard was neatly trimmed, brown shot through with copper where the light caught it. $3 is my bid, he repeated, voice steady as a riverstone. The room had gone quiet. Men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Anyone else? The auctioneer's gaze swept the room like a hawk hunting field mice. No one spoke. Going once, ... His voice dripped with disdain. Going twice, ... Double quotes, a pause heavy with judgment. Sold. To the gentleman with $3 to his name. Laughter again, crueler this time. Maria felt her cheeks burn with shame not her own. To be valued so little was one humiliation. To have even that meager sum mocked was another. The man approached, counting $3 silver into the auctioneer's palm. The coins caught the light, flashing like signals from a distant mountain. Up close, Maria noticed a scar that ran from his right temple to just above his jaw, white against sun-darkened skin. His eyes met hers, not with the predatory assessment she'd come to expect, but with something quieter, more complicated. You have a name, he asked, voice low enough that only she could hear. Maria Consuelo Vasquez, she answered, the syllables of her full name, an anchor to which she clung. He nodded once. Thomas Blackwood. He didn't touch her, merely gestured toward the door. Outside, the late afternoon heat wrapped around them like a woolen blanket. A dappled gray horse stood hitched to a post, stamping occasionally at the dirt. Beside it was a small wagon, its canvas cover sun-bleached and patched in places. Can you ride? Thomas asked, reaching for the horse's reins. Yes. The word came out cracked and dry. Then you'll take Sadie. He nodded toward the horse. I'll walk alongside. Maria stared at him, confusion replacing fear for the first time that day. You want me to ride your horse? It's a day's journey. To my place. No sense in you walking it if you don't have to. She hesitated, suspicion threading through her thoughts. Men didn't give without expecting return, especially men who bought women at auction houses. Thomas seemed to read her thoughts. I ain't what you're thinking, he said, eyes meeting hers directly. You have my word on that. Words were wind, her father used to say. But something in Thomas Blackwood's steady gaze made Maria reach for the saddle horn. He offered his cupped hands as a step, and she mounted with as much dignity as her stiff limbs allowed. They left town without ceremony. The wagon wheels cutting shallow grooves in the dusty road, the sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, painting the scrubland in amber and gold. Maria watched Thomas's back as he walked before her, leading the horse. $3, the price of her life, less than a bottle of decent whiskey. Why? She finally asked, when the silence had stretched too thin. Thomas didn't turn. Why what? Why by me? For $3. He was quiet so long, she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice had the quality of water over smooth stone. Some things ain't meant to be bought or sold. Some things ain't got a price that makes sense. He adjusted his hat against the sinking sun. Those men back there, they see a Mexican girl, think they know what she's worth, think they know what she's for, and you don't. Now he did turn, just enough that she could see the profile of his face against the evening sky. I know what it's like when folks decide what you're worth before they know who you are. His eyes met hers briefly. We got another hour before dark. There's water in the canteen if you're thirsty. Maria's fingers found the leather strap of the canteen. The water was cool against her parched throat. Ahead, the road unwound like a promise she wasn't sure whether to trust. Chapter 2. The land speaks on broke over the New Mexico territory like a fever, first the heat, then the light. Maria woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar canvas above her. She had spent the night in Thomas Blackwood's wagon, while he had slept beneath the stars, a respectful distance away. His bedroll now lay empty, dew glistening on the rough blanket. The smell of coffee reached her before she spotted him. A silhouette against the rising sun, crouched by a small fire. Maria smoothed her hair and dress as best she could before climbing down from the wagon. Her legs, stiff from yesterday's ride, protested each step. "Morning," Thomas said, not looking up as he poured coffee into a tin cup. He offered it to her, with a steady hand. "Figured you might need this." Maria accepted the cup, letting its warmth seep into her palms. "Gracias," she murmured, then caught herself. "Thank you. Your English is good," he observed, pouring a second cup for himself. "My father traded with Americans." The coffee was strong and bitter, but she welcomed its heat. He said knowing English meant knowing whether you were being cheated. A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips. A smart man. They ate a simple breakfast of cornbread and dried apples. Thomas spoke little, his eyes often drifting to the horizon where a smudge of green interrupted the golden landscape. "That's it there," he said finally, nodding toward the distant green. "My place will reach it by midday." As they packed up camp, Maria gathered her courage. "Mr. Blackwood, Thomas," he corrected, securing a bedroll to the wagon. "Thomas, what happens when we reach your land?" The question that had kept her awake most of the night finally escaped her lips. "What will you expect of me?" His hands stilled on the rope. For a long moment, he didn't answer, and Maria felt fear curdle in her stomach. Then he turned, his eyes meeting hers with that same direct gaze from yesterday. "I expect you'll want to rest. After that, .. He shrugged. "That's for you to decide. I don't understand." "You will," he finished, tying the knot. "Come on. It's cooler in the morning." The landscape transformed as they traveled, barren earth gradually giving way to patches of grass and clusters of pin and pine. A creek appeared, thin as a silver thread, widening as they followed its course. Maria rode Sadie again, while Thomas walked ahead, occasionally pointing out landmarks, a rock formation shaped like a sleeping wolf, an ancient juniper split by lightning but still growing. "Your land seems to welcome water," Maria observed. As they crossed the creek for a third time, Thomas nodded. "That's why I chose it. Land without water is just waiting to die." By midday, the creek had become a proper stream, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows. Birds called from their branches, the first Maria had heard since leaving her village months ago. Then, around a gentle bend, a small valley opened before them. At its center stood a modest cabin, its timber walls weathered to a soft gray. Corral housed several horses, and beyond it stretched fenced fields where corn stood waist-high. "You have crops," Maria said, surprise coloring her voice. "And cattle beyond the rise." There was no pride in Thomas's voice, just simple fact. "Not many, but enough." As they approached the cabin, Maria noticed details that spoke of care: a garden of beans and squash, window frames painted blue, a bench beneath an elm tree. This was not the dwelling of a desperate man, nor one who lived only for himself. A bark announced their arrival before they reached the yard. A rangy dog with one ear standing and one flopped over bounded toward them, circling Thomas with enthusiastic greeting before turning curious eyes on Maria. "Lettuce, that's Rusty," Thomas said. "He won't harm you." The dog approached cautiously, sniffing at Maria's skirts. She extended a hand, and after a thorough inspection, Rusty permitted a scratch behind his good ear. "He likes you," Thomas observed, something softening in his expression. "He's particular about people." Inside the cabin, Maria found simple but comfortable furnishings: a table with 4 chairs, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with books that surprised her. A door led to a second room, where she glimpsed a bed covered with a patchwork quilt. "You have a proper home," she said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. Thomas set down her small bundle of belongings, the only things the territorial officer had allowed her to keep. "Been working on it for 5 years now." He hesitated, then added, "My wife helped design it." Maria felt something cold slide through her. "Your wife, Sarah." He spoke the name like a prayer. "Yellow fever took her and our son 3 winters back." The revelation hung between them, heavy as storm clouds. Maria thought of the 4 chairs at the table, one for Thomas, one for his wife, one for their child, and one that now seemed to wait for her. The thought brought heat to her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she offered, the words inadequate against such loss. Thomas nodded once, then reached into his vest pocket. He withdrew a folded document, yellowed at the edges but carefully preserved. "This is why I brought you here." Maria took it hesitantly. When she unfolded the paper, she found herself looking at a land deed, the official seal of the territory of New Mexico stamped at the bottom. "I don't understand," she said again, the words becoming a refrain between them. Thomas moved to the window, looking out at the land he'd cultivated from wilderness. "When Sarah died, I nearly followed. Might have if not for a promise I made." His voice had the quality of rusted hinges, rarely used. She made me swear I'd do something that mattered. He turned back to Maria, his eyes the color of rain-washed sky. $3 was all I had in my pocket yesterday, all I had left after buying seed for next season. But when I saw you standing there, with your chin up even as they tried to break you down, he shook his head slightly. I knew what Sarah would have wanted me to do, but this deed needs your name on it. He gestured to the document in her hands. This land is yours now, Maria Consuelo Vasquez, or at least 50 acres of it is. Maria stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. You cannot give land to a stranger, especially not to someone like me. I can. I am. His voice was quiet but firm. What happens next is your choice. You can stay and work this land, sell it, or leave it fallow. You can go, if that's what you want. But no one will own you again. Chapter 3. What water remembers. A week passed like water through Maria's fingers, clear, impossible to hold. She moved through Thomas Blackwood's home, her home now, according to the deed that sat on the mantelpiece, her name added, in careful script with the caution of someone treading on ice. Each morning, she woke before dawn, prepared breakfast, and watched Thomas leave to tend the cattle or work the fields. Each evening he returned, dusty and tired, ate the food she prepared with quiet gratitude, and slept in the barn while she took the bedroom with its patchwork quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. They existed in orbits that rarely crossed, speaking little beyond the necessities of shared space. Yet Maria felt his presence even in absence. A coffee cup left clean by the basin, firewood stacked higher than she could have used in a day, fresh vegetables from the garden, appearing on the porch step. On the 8th day Maria woke to the sound of rain drumming against the roof. The world outside the window had turned silver gray, the distant mountains obscured by sheets of water. For the first time since her arrival, Thomas remained indoors, seated at the table with a ledger open before him. The creek will rise, he said without looking up. Best to stay close to the house today. Maria nodded, though he wasn't watching. She moved to the fireplace, adding a log to coax more warmth into the room. The flames caught, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Why did you really do it? She asked suddenly, her voice barely audible above the rain. Thomas looked up, his pencil pausing mid-calculation. Do what? By me? Give me land. Maria turned to face him. No one does such things without reason. He closed the ledger slowly. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. When they brought me to this territory, he said finally, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a price on my head in Missouri. Maria's eyes widened slightly. You were an outlaw. I killed a man. His voice held no pride, no shame, only the weight of memory. The son of a cattle baron who thought my sister belonged to him. Shot him when I found her beaten half to death. Thomas's fingers traced the scar that ran along his face. His father's men gave me this before I escaped. Maria sank into the chair across from him, understanding blooming like desert flowers after rain. So when you saw me at the auction, I saw someone else being treated like property. His eyes met hers, clear as the creek after a storm. I couldn't stop what happened to my sister, but I could stop what was happening to you. The silence between them hummed with something unspoken. Maria studied the man before her, not a saint, not a savior, but someone who understood what it meant to be valued only for what could be taken. I don't know how to own land, she admitted finally. My people were always moving, following the seasons. Land isn't something you own, Thomas replied, it's something you belong to. He rose from the table, moving to the window where rain streamed down the glass. My wife used to say that water remembers every place it's been. The ocean, the clouds, the mountains. It carries those memories as it flows through this soil, these plants, these animals, through us. Maria joined him at the window, keeping a careful distance. And what does the water remember of you? Thomas Blackwood. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the distant fields where corn bent beneath the downpour. Blood, he said softly. Loss, and before that, something like joy. And after? Maria asked. Thomas turned to her then, something vulnerable, crossing his features, that's still being written. The rain continued through the afternoon, trapping them together in the small cabin. Maria found herself studying Thomas as he returned to his ledgers, the careful way he formed numbers, the furrow between his brows when he concentrated, the gentleness with which he stroked Rusty's head when the dog placed it on his knee. This was not a man who had paid $3 for a servant or a companion. This was a man attempting penance for something beyond his control. As evening approached, the rain softened to a gentle patter. Thomas rose, stretching his back. I should check the livestock, he said. Reaching for his coat, Maria moved to the stove where a pot of bean stew had been simmering. It will be ready when you return. He paused at the door, hat in hand. Maria. She looked up, a question in her eyes. Thank you, he said simply, for staying. After he left, Maria stood in the center of the cabin that was somehow becoming hers. She touched the rough-hewn table, the blue-painted window frame, the deed with her name inscribed beside his. Outside, the land stretched beneath clearing skies, 50 acres of it, waiting for her decision. For the first time since the raid that had taken her family, Maria felt the faint stirring of something she dared not yet name as hope. Chapter 4. What the heart claims. Autumn came to the valley like a painter with a gentle hand, touching the cottonwoods with gold, the scrub oak with flame. 3 months had passed since Maria stepped onto land that bore her name. 3 months of learning the rhythms of this place, when to harvest the corn, how to preserve vegetables for winter, which paths the cattle preferred. When returning to the homestead, 3 months of careful distance between herself and Thomas Blackwood, they had developed a dance of sorts, moving around each other with deliberate grace. Maria had claimed the small bedroom as her own, hanging dried wildflowers from the rafters. Placing a small wooden cross her hands had carved above the door, Thomas continued to sleep in the converted loft above the barn, joining her for meals, helping with heavier tasks, then retreating to his separate space as darkness fell. Words between them had grown easier, like a stream finding its natural course, yet something remained unspoken, a current running beneath their conversations about crops and weather and preparations for winter. On the first truly cold morning of the season, Maria woke before dawn to find frost-etching patterns on the window glass. She built up the fire, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, one Thomas had purchased from a traveling merchant without explanation, and stepped outside to watch the sunrise paint the valley. The world held its breath in the space between night and day. Maria's own breaths formed clouds that dissipated into the stillness. Near the corral, she spotted Thomas, already at work, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the lightening sky. As if sensing her gaze, he turned. For a moment, they regarded each other across the frosted yard, neither moving closer nor retreating. Then Thomas lifted his hand in greeting, a simple gesture that somehow contained a question. Maria found herself walking toward him, drawn by something she had stopped trying to deny. "You're up early," he said as she approached, his voice rough with the morning chill. "The cold woke me." Maria pulled her shawl tighter. "Winter comes sooner here than in my homeland." Thomas nodded, looking toward the eastern horizon where the sun was beginning to crest the distant mountains. "First snow will be on us before long." They stood side by side, watching light spill across the valley like liquid gold. Maria was acutely aware of the space between them, small enough to feel his warmth, large enough to maintain the boundary they had silently agreed upon. "I've been thinking," she said finally, her words forming small clouds, "about the land." Thomas turned to her, his face carefully neutral. "Your land?" "Yes." Maria met his gaze steadily. "I cannot work 50 acres alone. No one's asking you to, and you cannot properly run this ranch while sleeping in a barn loft." Something flickered in his eyes, caution, perhaps hope. "What are you saying, Maria?" She took a breath that tasted of frost and pine and possibility. "I'm saying that land isn't meant to be divided by invisible lines, that a home isn't meant to hold separate lives that never touch." Thomas's hands, rough from work, hung at his sides. "I gave you that land indeed so you would be free to choose, and I have chosen." Maria's voice grew stronger. "I choose to stay, not as someone who was bought, not as someone who was given charity, but as someone who has earned her place." She gestured toward the fields they had harvested together. Garden she had expanded, the smokehouse where meat she had prepared hung curing. "I have put myself into this land now, Thomas. It knows me as it knows you." The first true ray of sunlight broke over the mountains, catching in Thomas's eyes, turning them the color of summer sky. "What are you proposing?" "A partnership." Maria took a step closer, close enough that she could see the pulse at his throat. "To people who have lost everything, building something new, not because of obligation or debt, but because they choose it." Thomas stood utterly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment and the deed. "Keep it as it is, both our names, or burn it in the fire. What matters is not what paper says, but what the heart claims." His hand rose slowly, hesitating before gently touching her cheek. Maria leaned into the warmth of his palm, her eyes never leaving his. "I never expected to find hope again," he whispered, his voice catching on the words. Maria covered his hand with her own. "Nor did I yet hear it stands between us." As the sun climbed higher, painting the frosted world in shimmering light, Thomas Blackwood bent to kiss Maria Consuelo Vasquez, not as savior and saved, but as two souls who had found in each other the courage to begin again.